And we are live. Hello, Peter.
How's it going?
It's going well. How about you, man?
Doing good.
It's been quite a while. We have seen each other. Um, so for the people that are watching us, Peter and I met in Paris at Motion Design Plus Paris. I don't know how many years back that was. Um, and yeah, so since then we've kept in touch like occasionally. But I've been looking like your progress as an artist and your craft. And before diving into all of that, I always ask the same question to all my guests. And this question doesn't relate to work. I don't want you to answer to this question basing yourself on your work. This is more like a personal thing. And the question is, who is Peter Clark? So who is the person behind the persona?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Because I feel like in our field, it's pretty easy to wrap your identity up in your artwork and what type of things you make, because it can be so all consuming. But yeah, I mean, a lot of my personality, I feel like, comes out in the things that are not necessarily my visual work. I definitely have a lot of my identity wrapped up in playing the drums, skateboarding, snowboarding now, all the activities that let me step away from visual art and then come back to it fresh. They're like my kind of extreme meditation spaces where the act of doing it just pulls me away from constantly thinking about what visual projects I want to make. So yeah, a lot of my identity, I think, is wrapped up in a lot of those activities. And yeah, it's a tough question to try and think of more philosophically and larger, bigger picture than just like the activities and crafts that I enjoy in my life.
Yeah, take your time. It's like I don't expect people to like answer from the get-go. That's the meaning of that's the real reason of this question is like dig deeper, you know. But we can come back to it afterwards, like let it like roll in the back of your head. For every guest, I choose a topic. And that topic is like tailor-made for the guest. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was because you've made from what people, let's say, occasionally use as an effect. At least in the evolution of your craft, you made it like your own identity, and I'm specifically here talking about glitching, like the whole process of distortion in the larger scope, not just glitch of video, but I saw like how when you did the titles for Motion Design Plus, you had recently discovered this guy that makes these tools that allow you to like with knobs and like physical machines kind of distort signals and tweak them in like infinite ways. But as you discovered that, like you went down that rabbit hole, like for quite a while. And so I was curious if you could like, first, the topic of today is from trend to identity. And I wanted to see if you could like elaborate more on, how did you discover that and how far did you went into the rabbit hole? Like what was that exploration?
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one because in a lot of ways, I don't necessarily want glitch to be my identity as an artist, and I do feel like it's been this dance of doing things that are very glitchy since college, but it really became more present in my work once I actually started getting analog glitch gear. But I think, my first experiences with doing glitch art definitely came from the Savannah College of Art and Design. I had a professor there, Michael Betancourt, and he's done a lot of books and literature about like the glitch scene. He taught these classes that were all about the history of motion graphics and visual art. And I love those classes because I discover all these artists that really inspired me, like the Whitney brothers, that, these guys that would modify old machines that were for like anti-aircraft guns, and they'd use that to make these crazy laser spiral graph looking things. And people like Jordan Belson that did really experimental practical effects work. And I often feel like I'm doing very similar things now, of just very experimental, strange visuals that somehow fit into the commercial space. But in that class, Michael Bencourt showed me a software called HexFiend, which is a hex editor where you can just go in, change the code of your video, and then when it tries to play back in different software, it absolutely shreds the thing and just often looks like compression glitches, like if you just uploaded some to YouTube like 100 times over and kept downloading and re-uploading, you get a lot of these weird artifacts. But what was interesting about HexFiend is you could really start art directing it a little more. And so I really fell in love with that process of being able to just tear things up and shred them, and a little more of a collaboration with the machine rather than these, like software we usually use where you click a button and you know exactly what it's going to do. I really love when a tool surprises me and I know the rough idea of, if I click this button, it'll sort of do this thing, but I'm not totally sure how it's going to react to the footage I'm giving it or the screen that I display it on. So my love for glitch and distortion really started there. Definitely grew as I got out into the industry, refilming things on screens, playing with lasers, a lot of stuff like that, like ways to redisplay imagery to make them more interesting and have more texture and detail. And then I think the first analog glitch module I bought was the Tachyons Plus Dream Weapon, which is made by this artist based in Florida. His name's Logan. Really tremendous visual artist. I think he just did a bunch of stuff for like the latest Alien movie. So his modules have been used by a lot of artists and definitely have like a look that a lot of people recognize as analog glitch now. And I still use that same module on so many show visuals projects. And through that, I've definitely found there's like a big community of people who also use the exact same modules, which is kind of why I don't like to wrap up my style too much in that space, because a lot of looks are really, you flip one switch on that thing, turn a knob, and you get this really, interesting look out of it. And just about anybody who has that module can get that exact same look. So, I've had people send me stuff from other concerts and say, well, did you work with this artist? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't do that. That's just somebody else with the exact same module. They figured out the same look. So I try not to like make it too much of like my thing, because it's, I'd rather it just be one facet of my tool set. And so I still a lot of other aspects to it.
No, I was going to say that, like that was like what I was going to connect now afterward, like after this question, was that more, I know I didn't want it to reduce you to, you just do glitch art, because I know you do like a lot more. But like when we met, that was kind of like, to me, kind of like I saw you, that was kind of like the beginning to other things, like I because then I saw you grow and going more into like shooting practical stuff, like through glass and water and foam and ink, and like put it in speaker and make it like vibrate and like metal particles and magnets. And, I've seen you like playing with all these like different elements. And so yeah, like I saw it like that was sort of like the door that opened to like a lot of other horizons, like it like fed you into all of that. Tell me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong, of course. um
Yeah. It
and so
definitely it
so
definitely does in some aspects. Yeah, yeah. I think like I was doing a lot of practical effects before the glitch work became a thing for me. But what is nice now is sometimes I'll have show visuals projects where they reach out to me for glitch work. And then, we get into the discussion of like, well, what's the content that we are glitching, which is always stuff that I like to shoot. And it's very often practical effects that are being glitched. And so sometimes that turns into like a whole song look that is completely practical because the source footage before it's glitched is actually much more fitting for the song than something glitched. So it definitely opens up doors into the other stuff I like to do as well.
yeah, and like this is something similar that like I've touched base like briefly about this also with G-Munk. Is
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays where everything is almost done behind a computer, um I find it, like I would say it's almost like refreshing to like know that there's still people doing still stuff in this way. Um because like you said, not I mean, certainly you can dial some knobs and you get a look, but there's a lot that like falls to me into the happy accidents field, sort of, because like you said, one footage is not the same as another one, and maybe I don't know, the colors will make the thing go the other way, or I don't know, and so like the randomness of it, and you also mentioned like experimental. So I saw you've worked on like projection mapping too, and so is it like the experimental scene? Is it something in which you are active currently, or is it something you do experimental work but you're not connected to the experimental scene?
Um, yeah, sort of in that mix. I love the experimental art scene and especially things that really play off of the medium in which they're made, give them more meaning. Like it's very like Richard Serra-esque, where it's like everything's about the process of how it was made, and that's what really pushes the concept. And I feel like experimental art, especially with new media mixed with old media, gets us into that space where it's really fascinating to see how things come together, and like the viewers get to see that and become more engaged with the art process rather than the final output. And so I'm definitely trying to be involved in the experimental art scene, which I feel like really blossoms in the projection mapping space, like all these festivals around the world. I've only done a handful of them. Like there's one in Florida called Alice Beach Digital Graffiti. So that one's been really cool to go and see like all these artists showing very experimental work mapped onto these different buildings. But sometimes it can be hard to both do commercial work and have the bandwidth to also be involved in the experimental art scene. So what I've been trying to do lately is work with other Portland-based artists to curate shows here that's usually an intersection between the different communities that we're a part of. So the one we have coming up is all skateboarders that make art or are in bands. And we're going to have a big show of, I think it's 35 artists, 5 bands, and then we're also going to have skate ramps set up. And that's kind of the space where I get to experiment and make some weird things, and also just like bring together communities that normally my art doesn't allow me to be involved with, because doing strictly digital art on the computer for music artists that don't tour in Portland, I feel like my commercial art doesn't really have much intersection with the community around me. So I think doing these shows is my way of trying to connect with the community and like bring together new media with traditional media, and see a little more of like that weird intersection that I enjoy.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly today kind of like important to do this because something that has come through with the different guests I've interviewed is that all of them have like in some way or another mentioned that what like as professionals we're providing a service and what we're producing like comes and goes very fast. Like for us, like we make a tremendous amount of effort. We put a tremendous amount of effort on a piece and it gets displayed for, I don't know, a week, a month, and then it gets forgotten forever into oblivion, And so finding purpose through work has become harder, I believe. And I'm going to connect this with what you said, like when I ask who you are, and you said like, yeah, skateboarding, snowboarding, all the things that like make me move away from the box,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like escape from the box, sort of. And I connect this also to what you're saying about the experimental scene and you trying to do these events where kind of everything collides, and into that collision, like something blossoms because like something new comes out of it. So I find it like extremely interesting. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is like, I know you skateboard a lot. I know it's been one of your passions. You can see the boards like displayed in my office, like for me too.
Oh yeah.
Does
My
it like
back there.
what? Sorry?
My board
Yeah,
right
yeah.
there.
Like, but yeah, like this, like skateboarding is like a whole culture.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious to know if skateboarding has influenced as a culture your art. And if like, of course your art doesn't influence how you skateboard, but those things intertwined. And I was curious to know, yeah, how that flow into you.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of overlap, and I think the main one is almost like where you were talking about, like trying to find purpose in our work, and it's kind of disheartening when you work a long time on something that only gets shown for a short amount of time. And I think what's interesting about skating is it's like the thing I love about skating is the process of it. Like the act of skating is like when it feels amazing, like uh it just made me fall in love with like the process of things and the fact that you also fail in front of people and that's like admired in the scene. Like if you're falling, people know you're trying something and you're getting up and trying it again. And that mentality of loving the process and almost loving failure, because then it's this process of like the more you do it, the easier it is to just get back up and forget about it and try the next thing. Which for practical effects or experimental things, you have to be so comfortable with things not working because a lot of things don't work and you just have to try things that in your head don't seem like they'll work, but you do it anyways just to see what happens. You just embrace the process, and then that's usually when a happy accident happens, or in skateboarding, that's when you actually stomp a trick, or you're trying one thing and you realize you're so close to landing something totally different because your board spins the other way. And so in terms of like finding meaning in work, I think for a while now I've gotten really attached to the process of making projects. And then once they're done, I'm just really ready to move on to the next thing. So, which is almost why like doing projection mapping pieces or festival things feel kind of strange, because once I show it, I don't usually like to think about it anymore or submit it to any other festivals or, because it's just like, okay, I'm done with that. I want to go do the next thing and just fall in love with the process of the next thing. And that's been, satisfying because, being productive and working on things makes me very happy and excited. And it makes work not feel like work, it feels more engaging in that sense. So skateboarding has really made me fall in love with that process of trying things and failing and just accepting that they might not always work out. And the clients that I work with definitely fit with that a little more than like a traditional like motion graphics client that, you're delivering something specific for them. You have a very like tight deadline. Things need to look exactly like a style frame. Like that type of work does not lend itself super well to the stuff that I often am working on, which is a lot of like showing mood boards and test shots and saying, this is kind of what I think you're going to get. And then, people trust the process and, I do the first shoot and then it's kind of a like, do you like this or do you not like this? And if they're into it, then we do more shoots, or if they're not into it, then I have like 3 backup things to try. And so, I think embracing the process and falling in love with it takes away the fear of trying these things and the fear that something might not work out, and then I'll get in like a time crunch of having to make something really last minute, which definitely still happens when things don't work the way I'm hoping they'll work. But, there's kind of a fun element to that as well, the like kind of spazzy trying to come up with something in the moment and see what happens.
Yeah, I would say that like when I started skateboarding and it wasn't yet like trendy. It was before the X Games. And so old ladies used to like, grab their bags when they would see us, and
Yeah.
and then like the X Games appeared and exploded and every kid had the board for a while. Now it's like toned down, but what skateboarding like taught me was like persistence also. Is before landing some moves, like you have to do them, I don't know how many hundreds, like 1,000 times. And even like once you manage to land them, you might try again the next day and you might fail again for a little bit. Like it's not because you do it once that then you will do it, like you will land it every time. And I think that to me has been like a learning, also, that kind of like learning to be humble in a way. It's like, it's not because you succeeded once that you will be, that now you're successful and you will manage to do it all the time. And I think like what you just said about like failing in front of people is like spot on. It kind of like removes the fear, but I think it's also like a culture, when you're in a skate park or like with peers, like skateboarding, everybody fails. Like everybody falls, everybody gets hurt, and nobody's there like to mock you. Like everybody's like it's like, hey, are you okay? Like, come on, like the next one is gonna be the good one. It's like everybody's kind of like cheering each other up, like steering up, and and I think like some communities are like more or less like this, but with current times that has been like kind of like being eroded. And I would love that to like change, like to be again, like to go back to kind of like the motion design scenes when it was bubbling and everybody was like still discovering what was possible. And I mean, it's kind of like a weird combination what you do, because like you said, it's a process, and it's not like a super tight defined board, but you've been working on stuff that is very home crafted, let's say, and at the same time you're doing visuals for like very big events or very high level productions. And so I'm curious like how those things can marry each other, because when you have like a show that's going to be displayed on a huge stadium, in front of, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people, um, you have to deliver. Like you cannot fail. And some like even if people trust the process, there's still like expectations. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious how those things live like together.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's definitely funny doing, I guess, what you'd call like DIY kind of like I think for music, like people call it like bedroom producers, where it's like people that just sit on their laptop in their bedroom and make beats, and um which I love doing that, like just making music on my laptop. So I think that translated over to, working from home. I turn the home studio just into whatever I need. And so I think being able to work in that small format helps me a lot, because the overhead of what it costs to produce these things is very low. Like most of the stuff is very small scale. I can just do it. Like I don't have to rent a big studio space and hire a crew and rent cameras and lenses. I generally have everything here, and it could look way higher quality if I had a massive crew and, a whole studio I'm working with. But usually, the stuff I'm filming lends itself pretty well to like these big LED screens that are very far away from people. So even though they're massive, shooting 6K on my Blackmagic camera usually covers what I need. So it's nice doing that DIY side of it, which I think does also sort of come from skateboarding, like building ramps as a kid, and going to skate parks, and you're like moving rails and kickers around to make your own configuration of things. It, I think, put me in a very like, how do I build this mindset with like things that are not traditionally used to make something. So I definitely hoard a lot of weird materials. Like I'll get like things ordered from Amazon, and they'll have some weird packaging to hold it. I'll be like, oh, I'll save that foam. I might use that for something. And then like a year later, I'm like, oh, I really need this specific shaped thing to hold like a sphere to like shoot lights at. And then I find that piece of foam. It's like, oh, perfect. I don't have to like build anything. I just have this thing that'll work. And I think that mindset comes from skate park DIY, kind of just figure out how to do it in a scrappy way. And since I'm doing, production at home, I don't really have to worry about, a client coming on set being like, oh, what, this doesn't look, like a big fancy production. What is this? Like, why is it just this little dinky thing like that's being filmed on the floor or something like that? But
welcome to my garage.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's nice to just be able to like figure out, it's like that problem solving that makes the process very satisfying for me. So I think the process with clients is interesting. I think my slightly like OCD kind of approach to it helps a lot, where I try and get things in front of clients as soon as I can in terms of like ideas. It feels really weird when I'm on teams for show visuals, because often other people are making, CG style frames or generating stuff with Midjourney and making these really beautiful frames. And then I'm just like making a board of like references from Pinterest, just like, this is roughly the idea. And it's hard because like what I want to do is ideally something that other people have not done a lot. Like it's ideally something kind of niche. So if there's fewer examples of it online, that is better for for getting a unique result, because there's not like a million versions of it out there. But that also means pulling references to express what I want to do in a mood board is a lot of like these loose connections, which I've not totally figured out if that works to my advantage or not. I think part of it helps because clients can look at it and be like, oh, I like, these references aren't necessarily beautiful, but I get how these combine to make something. And so they get to put a little bit of their own mind into it and say, okay, I think this is going to be cool. Or it might be working against me where they're like, I don't know about this. Like, I will humor him and let him try it, but these references don't look great. But then I try and do test shoots as soon as I can to just like understand how things move and look, but also get it in front of a client and say, hey, this is how it's coming out. Are you cool with going down this route, or do we need to pivot to something? And I think being diligent about doing things sooner than later really helps in that space. I definitely would not be able to, brew on something for a while and then crank it out in like the week or two before a show happens. It definitely gets a little intense on some show visual projects where it's literally like I get brought on and they're like, we have 3 days to make something, like just generate some crazy stuff. And then it's kind of like, all right, I'm just going to show them a few images of what I'm going to try, and then I'm going to see what happens. But, for bigger stuff, like I'd say the Billie Eilish concerts that I worked on with G-Munk were probably like the largest scale, biggest production that we've done. And that was a long time period and a lot of like pitching ideas, doing test shoots, showing frames. There was a lot of process behind that, which is the most ideal. But just being kind of OCD and getting ahead of things definitely helps in the process a lot. And I think I've been kind of in that mindset ever since I read that book. I think it's called Eat That Frog. Have you read that one? Yeah, that one got me in the very, whatever little task I'm not super excited to do, I just try and get that out of the way first. So then my day is just all the good stuff, and it ends up making me a lot more productive when I'm in a time crunch or need to get clients sold on an idea.
I was curious, like, like I will bounce on a couple of things you said is, like this kind of like rough mood board thing, like I think something that stayed with me that a teacher told me in art school, like a long time ago. He told me like, it's when you're presenting something, if what you're presenting to kind of like sell the idea is way too much defined, the person that's gonna like observe it won't be able to make it their own because it's yours. It's already too, like, there's nothing they can add to it. It's done, sort of. And the fact that like you present them something that still has a lot of holes where they can like cracks, where they can like slip in and go like, oh yeah, I understand. And what about this? I'm like, oh, and there's like an interaction that happens then, and I think that's something I often say to juniors is like, first of all, you're not making this for yourself. You're making this for somebody else who asks you to come in and do stuff. And secondly, like, even if the client is not creative, is not into arts at all, like they will have input in a way or another. So you have to leave room for that input. But I do understand like the weird, like you said, the awkward moment where people show up on the same call with all this like super refined stuff, and you go like, well, it's like, I have a couple things here. You have to imagine. But I think, honestly, it's like, it's weird, but I guess people come to you also for that. Like they don't come to you to do 3D realistic CGI. Like you have your own like we say in French, like your own cachet. You have your own identity. So that sets you apart. But I'm curious, like throughout this whole process, that is kind of like vague in a way. Do you have sometimes some oh shit moments, like moments where, well, you have to pivot, and then time is short, and you have to crank it up? Like, does that happen?
Oh yeah, that's definitely happened That's definitely happened before. And kind of what you're talking about too, of like people putting themselves, like giving them space to put themselves into it. I think, um, I always think of that when people talk about horror movies, and like the best monsters or villains are the ones where they don't really reveal them until the very end. And so a lot of people's fear of the monster or villain is because they're making it up in their head. They're only getting these little, glimmers of it in the shadows and all that. So I feel like concepts can be in the same realm of, you just give these little starter things and let people fill it in with their mind, and it becomes much more, like appealing for them to go down the rabbit hole of like what you're going to try and develop. Yeah, things definitely have failed before. I am always like really bummed when they don't work out, I try not to be too hard on myself though, and like embrace that skateboarding mentality of like, all right, that didn't work out, I'm going to get up and try something else, like different approach. And like, I think one great example was like, I was doing show visuals with Human Person, and we were doing like a tour for SZA. And I had already done like one or two looks, and they're like, hey, there's like one more thing we want you to try, and we know it might not work out. And so luckily it was something that we went into with the idea that it might not work. So it was lower stakes than usual. But they had suggested, they were trying to do this bioluminescence look, and they suggested actually buying these, I think the brand's called Pyro Dinos, and they're basically bioluminescent algae that you can buy, and they come in like little packages, and you can grow them, and and then they light up when you swoosh your hand through the water or like stir the thing up. And it seemed like a great idea to do actual bioluminescence and do like things that look like Houdini Sims, of like swish a hand through it and film that. So the idea seemed really solid. So I order the things, I'm watching all these YouTube videos on how to feed them, how to give them like enough sunlight. And it, in the classic practical effects world, you think something's really simple, but then you realize there's like 30 different factors that make it look the way you want. So I of course learned that the more you interact with them, the dimmer they get, which is like really bad for camera exposure, because you have to interact with them to see it in camera, and then you're setting your exposure, and then you switch them again, and all of a sudden they're darker. So now you're really underexposed, and it's just, this battle of just trying to get that working. And then, there were all these different facets to it I didn't think about. And in the end, it just like was not, I did a bunch of little passes of it and like showed them what I got. But in the end, we just had to scrap it because it just wasn't working out. And I think they ended up still using the CG stuff they had done, like all these particle effects that looked really beautiful, but it was hard to like see a cool idea not work out. And but it was a learning experience. Now I know, because it's come up on other calls where people are like, have you ever done like real bioluminescence? I'm like, oh, those, no, I don't. I don't want to deal with those again. I already know that's a pain. So yeah, it's been a learning experience. I'm trying to think if there's other projects where I've actually pivoted, because usually it's something doesn't work and then we just go to a whole different thing, like not necessarily trying to achieve the same look. It's just, oh, here's a whole nother thing we can film.
For a second, I when you were describing like just feeding them and all that stuff, I had this like Blade Runner 2049 scene of the guy in the algae farm, like with the suit. I saw you there. They're just like feeding all the things and like.
Yeah.
It's I think it's like, I wasn't like asking you for a lot of examples. I think the one that you just shared it's like already kind of like an interesting one, because I think very few of us get asked to like grow algae to be luminescent and and do a shoot with it.
Yeah.
And but what I find like interesting of this whole conversation, and especially I guess for people younger than us, is the to be able to see that there's other ways to do things. Like people by de facto nowadays, most of the time, will go to the computer to solve a problem. And that brings to me like the memory of a project I worked on for the International Red Cross. And it was a movie about their history, kind of like the legacy they've been building through the years. And they didn't have the budget at all to go shoot across the world and stuff like that. And so I had like in mind this idea of forced perspective, kind of like create these scenes, sculpt into like small pieces of foam and terrain and little maquettes, and do a forced perspective in camera to like put people into those and shoot that in a studio. And that's a interesting story because first of all, we had to pivot because some stuff wasn't working, because we didn't have enough distance, because lighting up everything we just didn't had enough. We had a ton of gear, but clearly not enough to bombard light enough on the people and on the front, and so we had to pivot, and then some of it had to be done in post, but it was clearly like a combination of macro lenses and stuff that was printed and those sculptures and 3D then afterwards, and most of the people think it's all made on the computer, when in fact a lot of was done like practically. So I think it's like, and I think more and more, like now that we've, like you mentioned, like Midjourney, like more and more people will be able to prompt whatever they want. These processes that are more like crafted and handmade will make a difference in a way, because there's this happy accident factor to it that will become a plus instead of like a handicap, if you want. To go back to my first question, like who you are, like now I'm going to try to reformat that question differently. What are the things that matter the most to you? Not especially as a creative, again, more as a human,
Yeah. And, top level stuff is always family and, my girlfriend and the people that I care about in my life. They'll always have the biggest priority, spending time with friends, all the classic stuff. I think like topics that I care about that do sort of enter my work, is just about like the dualities between nature and technology, and our like technology dependence in a lot of ways, and how it, I always love Marshall McLuhan's book, The Medium is the Message, and how the tools that we use to interact with each other really shape how we see each other and our human interactions. And, like obviously like using things like social media really change our perspective of what it means to have a conversation with somebody. So I feel like that I touch on that in my work. I don't necessarily make big, obvious statements about it, but it is something that I do think about a lot, and it's important to me to find that balance for myself, because growing up, my parents, like the thing they'd always say is like, go outside and do something, like, go do something out there. Like they were always pushing me not to be playing video games and spending time inside, which I easily could have. I love playing video games as a kid and just like watching TV, doing stuff indoors, but they were always pushing me to go outside and go skate, go do something. And I think that's really important to me now, is making sure I get to spend time outside. It's part of why I'm in Portland, Oregon, is there's so much nature. It's so easy to bike everywhere. It's so easy to step out and like break my patterns of life and go do something that, go down some random bike path that I've never gone down before and just break that cycle of doing the same thing every day. And I try to do something every day that does change my like day-to-day cycle, because I think that's really important, to have something new every day to experience, even if it's something small, like just exploring a new part of the city. So I do think that's like a big facet of my personality, is trying not to do like the normal thing, even if it's like normal that I've created for myself of, like, oh, well, I always go to this coffee shop and walk this street to get there, or always eat this thing for lunch or go to this restaurant. I try and change things up on like that smaller scale as much as I can. And I think that just makes life more interesting, and it feeds into everything else, like my artwork and my music and my relationships with other people. I feel like they're a lot more full when I give myself more variety in life on like all these different scales. So yeah, and I think, technology like computers and phones, like there are these windows into all sorts of really fascinating information and experiences. But I think for me, I so often, like when I think about my projects, I have a lot of memories associated with them. And that's like really important to me, is like, what memories am I making with my work? Because it's like this very all consuming thing. And when I'm working on the computer, it's very hard to remember much about that project, because I'm just sitting in one space looking at this square box. And, usually it's like I remember a song I was listening to while I was working on it, or, something in that vein. But if I film something, it's this whole little experience that I remember, like who was helping me film that, or what problems did I run into setting it up, or some weird, like I remember stepping out of my apartment and seeing this weird light on my window that looks like a, poltergeist is coming out of the hallway or something. I'm like, wow, my neighbors were seeing that for the past 4 hours. I don't know what they think I do in my apartment, but they're definitely freaked out by that. It's just those little moments of like odd surrealism that just make life seem more interesting. And I like to really push that, as much in my life as I can, because, a lot of projects require you to be very structured, especially if you're freelance. You really have to like structure your life and your time and like be on top of things. And so it's easy, I think, to build a box for yourself and then not break outside of that box and give yourself variety. It's easy to just keep doing the structured thing to make sure you're on top of work and on top of like all the other things in your life. And I think, we all need to break out of that box sometimes to like bring that joy into our work, and like, step away to go skate or snowboard or surf, or, do something to like reset and have some serendipity in our lives.
Yeah, I do think it's a way of like feeding your, I don't want to say your brain, but it's like feeding your inner self with other things to be able to then create more. Otherwise, you're just like emptying yourself, but you're not putting anything in. And like one of the things I love the most when I'm directing something, shooting something like live action, is like you said, is the people. Is certainly a shoot is intense. It's like at the end of the day, you're beaten up and tired, but you've spent that day with people, and everybody brought their own like contribution to the piece. And I mean, personally, I love that. I love the fact that, that this is something we're kind of like constructing and building together than,
Right.
like you said, just me doing everything in front of a computer, completely isolated. Um, and funny enough, like, I mean, my father hated skateboarding. He couldn't understand, like, in the 90s, I mean, I started end of 80s, beginning of the 90s. And at that time, that was connected a lot with the grunge movement too. So he couldn't wrap his head with the music. And he found it like juvenile and I always like tell him, like, nowadays, like, you can't even imagine like how much that scene taught me and made me grow in some aspects. And I would say, like, even like the anger in a sense, like you're a teenage when you're in your like 15, 16, 17 years, like you're still like kind of like trying to find your identity, and you feel that the world doesn't understand you, and with all that kind of like music scene and anger and stuff like that, kind of like also pushed me in ways I didn't thought I was capable of,
Mm-hmm.
like, be it like pain, difficult moments. It's a scene that like brought me a lot of like strength and comfort.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and I totally connect with you about like what you were saying about breaking the routine. Part of the reasons I do this job is because I get to know, like, meet new people. I wouldn't say every day, but like super often. I work on different projects that are completely like worlds apart from one to another, and it's like different topics. So I have to study different topics, and that to me means the world, because even if tomorrow we talk about, I don't know, accounting and mathematics, and I will be like, oh, that's super interesting. The idea of doing that every day, the same thing, would drive me completely crazy. Um, and I'm just like smiling because I'm noticing that you have like that Sony screen in the back. Uh, total, yeah, man, that's a classic. Um, and I saw you, like, I saw you on social media when you were like asking if anybody had like this TV, like tube, like cathodic tube television on their like garage somewhere, because you had something to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is more like let's say humorous question, but is what you like already what we do as motion designers is hard to explain sometimes. Like, some of my family still thinks I do websites, which is not at all what I do, but what you do is even like more kind of like alien. So I was wondering, how do you explain what you do
Yeah.
to like to people that don't know the field, of course?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one for me to explain. And like just touching on the skateboarding stuff you were talking about as well, I feel like the skateboarding scene when I was growing up really helped me understand like my limitations as well. Like a lot of it is physical limitations, like how hard can you push yourself to do something. And I think that's a big part of like finding identity, is like seeing how hard you can go, like in a space, or like, where your limitations are, especially for like teenagers, where you kind of feel oddly invincible, but then you're, trying things that do humble you, and you realize like, oh, I can't do a backflip. That is way harder than I thought it was going to be, or, just these different things. And I feel like in the art world too, you start, you get to try these things and see, how crazy difficult they can be sometimes. And you find your limitations and start learning a lot about like your identity as an artist or creative. But then going into how I explain what I do. So for a long time, it was very difficult because I was making, like commercial graphics, which people sort of understood. If I said animation, they thought I meant like Disney or Pixar or something. That's kind of a classic thing for motion designers to get mistaken for. Yeah, like, you know, it never felt good to say like, oh, I make a lot of promos that go on social media, because that just like feels like it belittles the process of it. But then a few years ago, when I started doing predominantly show visuals, because I'd say now it's like 90% of my work is show visuals, and then I'll do one or two traditional motion graphics jobs or like a promotional video for something. So now I just say, oh yeah, I make show visuals for artists that are going on tour. And then people usually respond with like, oh, like the stuff on the big LED screens. So like, yeah, that stuff. And it just like, it clicks. And I think that's just with the industry changing, with DJs becoming so prevalent, you know, it's just this, like everyone understands that like if you go to a big show that costs a lot of money, there's probably crazy visuals on a screen and a bunch of crazy lights. And I think everyone now understands there's a whole production that goes into that, and there's a lot of money that goes into that space. So it's been more established of like, oh yeah, somebody makes that stuff. And so that's been a nice, you know, I just tell people I kind of go into that space. If people are more curious about like what type of work I make, that definitely gets a little harder to explain, because even some motion designers don't like fully, they're like, okay, so you do analog stuff with like a plugin. I'm like, no, with like physical gear. And then, you know, it goes on a TV, and they're like, well, how do you put that like on the screen? And it's like, well, I film it with a camera and then have to color correct, and then I layer stuff in After Effects. And you know, it's like I start realizing that a lot of my process is like, you know, 6 different pieces of software and like just all these different things that I know just a tiny bit about, enough to like stitch them together. So it's yeah, it's funny like chatting with other motion designers about it, because it takes a while to kind of get to the space that I'm usually in. And even then, it's like the next year I'll be trying to do something different because I'm tired of doing the same process. And so, yeah, it's a loaded question, but how do you explain your work to like family and friends and other motion?
I mean, through my career, I'm situating myself more and more in the creative phase, and I do execution, but like through the years, I've got more and more interested into the ideas more than, you know, like learning Nuke and using Nuke like 100% of its capacity. Or I've been trying myself also to distance more from the computer, because it's, yeah, I came to realize that I was spending so much time on it. And it's not that I felt I was missing life, or, you know, like something as like cliche as that, but I did felt that it was starting to have a toll on me, like to being exposed constantly on screens, to screens, sorry. And so, and as soon as I like started like doing more and more like creative process, like thinking about concepts, like reading books, like searching documentation, finding metaphors, writing, I felt lighter in a way. That doesn't mean I don't execute. I do execute still, like a shit ton lot, but I try to live more in that creative bubble than the pure technical phase. And I wanted to bounce on something you said, but yeah, like recently I worked on for some show visuals. I had a small part, like it was a very big team, like there was a lot of people involved. And what was also kind of like super interesting in the process is that like, you mentioned, there's like, it's not only LED screens, there's like lights, there's like smoke, there's this, that, like the guy holding, like suspended from wires flying through the thing, like a lot of the things that come into play, and all of that needs to find like a balance. And I found it super interesting because nobody was trying to step onto, like the light guys weren't like saying like, oh, we have to dominate this. Like it was all of the conversation on how everything needs to play well with everything and be like complementary. Because just lights alone, you can do some incredible stuff for a show. So it's all kind of, each one of them has to enhance the other. And that to me is kind of like also what I've been trying to do more from our process, is as I collaborate with other people, is try to see how we can enhance each other, instead of like, even if I'm directing, even like instead of me directing something, is like certainly there will be zones where I will be like kind of like channeling more things, but also like leaving these zones of expression, because then the person will do something and I will go like, shit, like this is like way better than I had imagined. Like I want more of this. Like let's do more of that, and then it becomes a conversation. That I think is like vital, and it's part of why I do this podcast too, is to have a conversation and to people to see that, like they might have seen your visuals for Billie Eilish, but then realizing, okay, all that was done in a garage, sort of, like with a piece of foam from an Amazon package, like, I mean, to me, that's the magic, it's like you said, yeah, I didn't had a crane with a helicopter and 10 drones flying. It was just me like playing mad scientist in my room, like with a couple friends. It's like, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. There's like it's almost like doing magic or illusion work, trying to like make something small scale in your garage or your apartment look like some big, crazy, abstract thing. Working with other people is, it's the best, because you get to step out of your usual way of doing things, and it brings that serendipity to it, where someone will suggest an idea that comes from their usual approach, and all of a sudden you think about your lighting or design a totally different way, because they've got their own approach to it. And that's part of why I love doing like this gallery exhibition we're doing, like with all the skaters and music, because like my co-curator, she approaches poster design very differently than I do, because she's like a ceramicist at heart, and so she'll come in with like all these ideas for the poster that I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm being super rigid about my layout design, and like she's coming in with like a whole other like, what if we like stretch the type and do all this stuff, and I'm like, oh wow, it's like, that's like my graphic design professors in school would like totally like shred that if that was like something I did. But now I'm like, oh, but with the grid system in place, if we do that actually would look pretty sick. So we're like breaking the grid now. And like, so I get to bring in a lot of her creative ideas into the space. And she's super fresh to it because she normally is doing ceramic work. And so her perspective on posters is very like ungoverned by like traditional design rules that usually kind of like will box me into like, oh well, I don't want to do that because like you're not supposed to treat type that way, or like you can't put things that close together. And like, so then I'll do something fresh because I'm bringing in her perspective. And I love that about shoots. And like the large scale film shoots are kind of intense because everybody's got their day rate, and so every hour you spend not producing something is like a ton of money being spent. But small scale shoots are like my favorite. Like I just did one. I was working with Ethics, Anthony he's an amazing artist. I don't know if you've seen his work, but he does very similar realm of stuff that I do, like analog digital crossover, a lot of music artist clients. And I was helping him out on a tour for this like heavy metal band called Spirit Box. And we wanted to do like some visuals of someone like drowning underwater because their new album is like very aquatic themed. And so I had, seen all these Pinterest shots of, people's faces distorted by water and things like that. And I have a fish tank. So I got two of my friends to come over, and one of them was just like below the fish tank and we're moving the water, and like the other one's helping me move lights around. And it was just like, it's just so fun and weird to like get to do little shoots like that with just like a couple friends. It's low stakes, like they're getting paid for their time, but it's not like hundreds of thousands of dollars going out the window if we try something that doesn't work. And then, they're coming over, not usually, like neither of them are really involved in like the film scene. So they're just like, oh, this is crazy, a bunch of lights and lasers set up and a fish tank. And we're like, okay, we're doing this. What does that look like? And then they see it on the camera and like, wow, that looks really, really weird. What, and it's just like, we all get to discover together and be like, is it going to work? Maybe. And I was like, oh, wow, that's actually doing what we were hoping. That's sick. Or like, oh, that's not as good. And, and then there's all the weird memories too of like, we had to use like water from the hose to fill up the tank for just like time's sake. And of course it's middle of winter, so that water is freezing. So like my friend's like plunging her face into this freezing cold water. And so it's just like all this, like, just back and forth, like, you owe me for this. Like, this is not what I signed up for. It's just like the things you don't think about until you're doing the shoot. And you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of quirky and weird. Like, I don't know. And then, we get to see stories of it, up on these massive LED screens for all these, all these fans of the band. It's like the lights are going crazy and the music, and it's just cool to see it go from like little, living room fish tank setup to like these massive screens. And yeah, it's very memorable, and that's what I enjoy about the process of working with other people. It's like it sticks up here more than the other stuff, and I think that's what's most important to me with projects.
Yeah, I would say that like also something that has like struck me about your personality, and it's something I personally appreciate, and something I felt when I met you in Paris is that despite like doing these like shows and stuff you work on, it's how low key you've remained. Kind of like how, I don't want to say humble because that sounds like, again, cliche, like it's just, you're doing your thing, it's and maybe I feel you haven't got enough coverage for what you do. I think you should, but I mean, it is, what it is. As long as you enjoy doing what you do, that's what matter. And I was curious, like, to start like very slowly landing the plane is where your head is at now. You're like, we've talked about the glitching, the shooting, the things and everything. You've finished recently the Billie Eilish visuals. So like you said, now that's done, that's behind me. So where is your head now? Like, or where it's going to be, like, where's your mind going now?
Well, my mind's definitely in the current projects that are happening. That's, it's, I'm definitely that classic personality type of like overwhelming yourself with things to do. So you never actually really like sit still, which, I very much so got from my mom. She's like retired and still does like 50 different things that seem like she has a full-time job. So yeah, my mind is definitely in like all the projects happening right now, and then just, life stuff, with just like friends and family, playing music with friends, developing my music on the side. I feel like there's always a project or something that I've like not done in forever, and I'm just like the second I'm not working on visual projects, it's like I'm so ready to make music. I have not sat down and produced a song in so long, and I don't really like put that stuff out into the world very often, but the process of making it is like the most satisfying thing out there. So yeah, I think my mind, like in terms of like where my work is going, I feel like I used to have like goals with like things I wanted to make that I was working towards, but now it's just kind of become like more free flowing and just kind of going with what work is showing up. I don't really try and direct it anywhere specific. And I think it's in part because I feel like when I try to go in a certain direction, it never works out. It's always just like if I submit stuff to galleries, I never get stuff in shows. Like my stuff never gets picked, which is part of why I did the first gallery show here. Was I just got so tired of not having work shown that I was like, I'll just curate my own gallery and invite other people to be a part of it, and we'll just like do our own thing, and then I don't have to submit and deal with like my stuff just getting turned down every time and paying like a entry fee or whatever. And then now it's slowly grown into like we're doing these massive shows that I barely have time to even make art for, because there's so much to do with the production of it, which I kind of love, because now I'm starting to do like show visuals for the bands that perform in it. So it's like I've sort of pivoted into like an event production space with that, without really thinking to myself like, oh, I want to do event production. I've just started drifting into that space and finding what I like and dislike about it. And then, I want to do more festivals and projection mapping stuff, but I also, every time I sit down and say, I'm going to put together a proposal and submit to this big festival that has a budget that'll allow me to like travel and go do a thing, I just never, like a commercial job always comes up and I always run short on time. And it's like, okay, well, maybe next year I'll submit to it. And so when I do get to do festivals or shows, it's usually people reach out and they're just like, hey, I saw something else you did. Would you like to do that for our thing? And same with like things like Motion Plus. Like I don't really get hit up for conferences, but I'm also not like trying to reach out to them. I'm just waiting. I'm just doing what I love to do and hoping that someone will see it and be like, oh, like you should come do that for our thing. And, just kind of, just making the stuff I want to make. And so far that's worked out better, because then commercial clients see that I've made something and they say, well, that kind of works for our brand or our thing we're trying to do. So like, we'll bring you in for that. And so I'm trying to embrace more of that, of just making things for the sake of making it.
Yeah, it's like I find it like, again, like that's interesting, because nowadays there's like the internet is full of gurus, like teaching you life and teaching you how to be successful, and these are the 10 steps to like get clients and whatever. And like, first of all, like I don't believe any of those really work, because if there was like a secret sauce to success, we will be all doing it.
All doing.
And so like the fact that you're doing that and you're being successful, I love it, because then it's clearly breaks apart from the, oh, set your goals and do everything to go into that direction, because then that people will notice you for that. Like what you're saying is exactly the opposite. It's like, as soon as I tried, it wasn't working. So as soon as I stopped trying, and it did my thing, then people started noticing it. So I found that like honestly awesome. And you said something like very, like, it went very, very fast, and you talked about your mom, but like, is there a reason why you don't want to sit still? Because generally when we overwhelm ourselves with stuff, it's because we don't want to stop and maybe find ourselves with ourselves, or like thinking about stuff that we don't want to think about. So if there's something that you don't want to talk about that's totally fine, but just I had to ask.
Yeah, I definitely think about that. I think I'm like a lot of artists that deal with not like a clinical depression level, but more of a like, when I'm not doing something, I just feel a general like kind of sadness that kind of just like, and it's so being productive just generally makes me happy. So it's kind of, and I don't know if that's necessarily just growing up, like I was saying with my parents, it's like, go outside and do something, go be active, maybe part of it is that mindset of just growing up with like, you should always be doing something, or just being around two parents that worked a lot and were constantly like, they didn't really like sit down and watch TV all day or anything, it was always a like, we've got these tasks, let's go do things. And so I think a lot of it comes from just that space of growing up around it. And I love my parents, and like there's a lot about their lives that I think I bring into like how I approach life. And so a lot of it pulls from that. And yeah, it's definitely, there's nothing like in particular I can say like, oh, if I sit still, I start dwelling on that like traumatic life event that I've been suppressing within. But it's definitely like I'm sure like a lot of artists deal with the same thing of like, the process of doing something kind of negates the like unhappiness with things in the world. And I think there's plenty of things right now for sure to be unhappy with that feel very out of my control. So I'm just like, all right, what can I control? It's just like my experience of the world and what I get to make, and the things that bring me happiness, and the more that I can embody and like produce, like as long as I'm creating things that make me happy, I feel like that emanates into the people around me, and they get to be ideally a part of that. And so and I just want to be surrounded by like a community of people who are all really excited to make really weird stuff and are just doing their thing regardless of what other people think of it. And so I'm just trying to like embrace that as much myself, because I feel like people of similar mindsets will just gravitate towards you as like, just like getting to make a community where it's a safe space to just be weird and create things that are not just like traditional, things to do with your life. And yeah, so that's definitely kind of my thing. It's mostly just to not just get unhappy with all the things in life that I can't control, so it's and in an odd way, I'm kind of making art that I can't control. a lot of it is just like, doing liquid stuff that I'm like, okay, it just made that shape. I can't control that, but that's a cool discovery. So I will document that and make art out of it and share that with other people. And
that's what we call a paradox, like you're willing to control what you can control by doing uncontrollable things.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think like, honestly, it's a very nice way to kind of like wrap it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, like, even if you want to control things, sometimes you can't. And I think I've come to also like with the years accept that, that like the future is unpredictable. And as much as we love to have these zones of like safety and comfort, that might tomorrow not be there anymore, because whatever happens. And so, but what you can control is what you're doing today. And so make the most of you can from today. Tomorrow will be tomorrow. It's like certainly plan ahead and stuff like that. But like, like you talked about your family, like my father is still like a workaholic and a perfectionist. And I solely took a lot of that with me. And I've been also like working a lot on trying to break cycles, like from stuff that you inherit from like from the family, from traditions, from a lot of stuff. And that when I started thinking about it, was like, okay, yeah, my parents were like that, or they teach me this, but do I still kind of like align with that with my kid, for example?
Mm.
Maybe not, and I'm not saying that this regarding your parents, I'm just talking about mine's. It's not because something is a tradition that it needs to be continued, like again, transpassed.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to tone down also on that, like be less demanding on myself, because then, being a perfectionist, you go like always thinking that stuff is not good enough, like you haven't achieved what you wanted to achieve and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then you never share your work, and then you never get the projects you want to get because it's not out there for people to see. Yeah,
exactly. And again, embracing, like you said, failing is like, it's better to put something that is not great out there, but it's good, than trying to be perfect and just never get there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to share something, like one last thing before we wrap it up. It can be anything. That's now it's like you have carte blanche. Like now it's your pick to go and see how you want to close this.
That's a lot of pressure for the final
Not
question.
at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know. It's like, I feel like we've covered a lot of big topics, talking about fear and just trying things and not worrying about whether they turn out. But yeah, I don't know. I think maybe building on that last point, the idea that like things don't have to be perfect when you share them. I know a lot of people who really admire artists that have like 5 things on their website and they're hyper curated, and and I honestly will go to those sites and be like, I don't know, I'm kind of like, it looks pretty, but I'm kind of bored. Like, I feel like, I can't see anything about how it was made, or, what other stuff they did to get to that point. It just looks like they came out of the ether and are suddenly the most amazing, talented, craftsmen in the world. And I think this is like one thing that I first resonated with G-Munk, before he and I met when I was a student. They announced he was coming to speak, at the college. I'm like, okay, who's this G-Munk guy? And I'm looking at his website, and I remember the first thing I loved was that it was, his old site was just a wall of work. It just went all the way back, and I was looking at everything because I was like, wow, I love this guy's stuff. And got all the way to the end, and it's like Flash websites that I think now he would like rip them a new one on like design, but he was just like, he has it all up there so you can see where he came from and where he is now. And that was so inspiring for me as a student to be like, wow, that was like his first professional work coming out, and now he's making like, at the time he had just done all the Tron UI stuff with that team, and it was like all over the internet. Everyone was freaking out over that, and it was just so cool to see it go from like A to B, and all the work he put in to get there. And like, it's like the process that I fall in love with, is seeing how artists grow over time. And so I think releasing the fear of like whether something's perfect or not helps to just like put things online, move into the next thing, and just recognizing that it's a process towards working to bigger and better things. And I know for me, the only way I've got more work is putting things on the internet, on Instagram or my website. So, if I was I am a perfectionist in some weird ways, a perfectionist for imperfections, but, I also just accept that like when I'm at the end point, I'm just going to get it on the internet and, move on to the next thing. And I think that's a healthy mindset if you're trying to get into weird experimental work or things that just feel, very satisfying to craft, and not worrying so much about what the final product is, but more about how engaging the process is to make it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally connect with what you're saying. It's at some point you just have to sort of like let go.
Mhm.
And it's like what also like I take out from our conversation, and you mentioned this a couple times, is how this process like keeps evolving. It's like an intrinsic part of what we do. It's like it's constantly morphing, and if it's not, that means you are in a comfort zone. That's something that stuck with me that you said, is like, if I'm finding too much references of what I'm trying to achieve, that means that it has been overly done, and I'm not like in this zone where I'm doing something, I'm not going to say new, but like something different.
Mhm.
And something I've already mentioned also like with other guests, it's like when I start like thinking about concepts and ideas, I don't go on the internet searching for 100 like references or stuff to inspire me. I often like run the opposite way and just don't look at anything, or look maybe at like random stuff that has nothing to do at all with what I'm going to do, because then that's where the weird connections happen.
Mhm.
That's where, like this thing that didn't seem connected at all suddenly go like, oh, but this could be a perfect metaphor for this thing, and why if I do this and that, and then, oh, then it means this, it's like, and then you come with something new. So I've definitely embraced the same kind of like mentality.
Mhm.
So Peter, thanks for being with me. Thanks for spending the time and sharing with us your process and the things you're going through. I don't know, man. It's cool to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to chat after so many years after Motion Plus. So it's good to catch up.
It was great to catch up. Thank you for being with me. See you soon.
So yeah.